Hi there, my name is Deborah Melkin. My blog is debthedba.wordpress.com, and I'm a Microsoft MVP for the data platform. Today we're going to talk about creating Parquet files in Azure directly from an On-Prem SQL Server 2022 instance. You may ask, why would I want to do something like that? There are a bunch of different reasons, and I'm sure you'll come up with your own. Two examples that I thought of are, one, creating files to be ingested by other teams. We're still taking our data and moving it in and out of different systems, taking it from our SQL Server, creating a file that, let's say, our analytics team needs to then ingest and do whatever sort of process it needs to do on that. Usually there's some pipeline involved or some other complicated process. Now we can simplify it and take the data directly from our database, create those files that are available for sharing, and still use that data directly ourselves. Another example could be creating archive data and being able to archive it in a different system. We all know we have that one table that's got like that 20 years worth of data just taking up space in our database because someone somewhere thinks we're going to need to be able to access it and query it at some point in time. Instead of keeping it in our database, we now have the option to create that file in storage somewhere else and still be able to access it as we need it. Plus, there's an added bonus that data is not going to change, and we can put it in a format that will be immutable. We can't change it. All of this is under the heading of data virtualization, not to be confused with visualization. We're talking virtualization here. What we mean by that is having our data in a different storage, in a file that we can then access through a link that we can use like it were any other table, a virtual table if you want to think of it that way. We're going to do that by querying our data directly from our SQL Server. I have a VM sitting on my personal laptop down here. It's set up for SQL Server 2022. I'm going to create a connection to my Azure Blob Storage, and I'm going to create my virtual Parquet files directly in that Azure Blob Storage. And at the same time, I'm going to create that virtual link back to the file from my SQL Server so I can query it directly. It sounds a little complicated, but it's actually quite straightforward. Let's take a look. Here is my Azure Blob Storage. You can see there's nothing here. I don't have anything. I've created a container, and we're going to put things in here as part of this process. So you know I'm not doing anything funny. Shared access tokens. This is what I'm going to use to connect to my Azure Blob Storage. I'm going to create a key. I'm going to set an expiration date. And then I'm going to generate my SAS token and URL. Here we're going to get this really long value that starts with SV equal or Sam Victor equal. We're going to take that, we're going to copy the rest, and then we're going to put that into our scripts. I'm now in my Wide World Importers database, and now we're going to create our Parquet file. We're using the syntax create external table as select, CTAS. Whenever you're looking for the syntax, how to do this, when you want to go to Microsoft documentation, which is pretty much what I followed to make all of this happen, this is what you're going to look up. Create external table as select. I'm going to create my customer transactions. I'm setting my location to be a folder directory inside my Parquet file. That's my data source. And I'm saying file format as Parquet file format. When we create these, we are creating formats in our blob storages. And then we're going to use our select to say what data are we going to use. So I'm going to use customer transactions for 2013. And I'm going to run this. 25,000 rows created. Now at the same time I created that file, I've also created an external table so I can now query that file directly. And I can see all of those records. Now I know what you're thinking, there's got to be more to it. There's a trick up your sleeve. There's got to be more to this setup than what you're showing. Well, we've already gone through the Azure Blob Storage side of things, so now let's take a look at the other side. External tables uses the polybase functionality that was first introduced with SQL Server 2016. So the first things we have to do is we have to make sure polybase is installed and is enabled. Then we have to make sure our master key is created. Obviously, I've already set those up. The next thing is we now need to take that credential, that shared access signature that we grabbed from our Azure Blob Storage, and create database scoped credentials. So now we need to make sure that we save however we're connecting to Azure within our database. And yes, this is database specific. You can create it, and as I mentioned, the secret starts with SV, Sam Victor, equals. This is a very, very small portion of the access token that's actually created. If you change it because you have an expiration date, you can just alter your database scoped credential, and then you have your new token that's accessible. There's a DMV sys database scoped credentials that you can run, and then you can see that I have a credential for my Azure storage that we'll be using. The next piece of this is creating an external data source. This is actually one of the new pieces of functionality that comes with SQL Server 2022. And the external data sources can be much more than these files. It's not just saying, is it my blob storage? It can be your Azure Data Lake. It can be an S3 compatible storage. You can also set it to be SQL Server. You can set it to be Oracle, Teradata. Go look at the Microsoft documentation to learn a lot more about what data sources are available. For our purposes, for our external tables today, we're going to create an external data storage, my Azure storage, and I'm setting it up to be my blob storage using that credential we just created. And then we're going to create the external file format. So now we can say, what file am I creating? We can kind of save that, make it reusable. And so I'm creating an external file format, Parquet file format. That's what I'm naming it. Format type, Parquet. And all of this, again, is saved in our databases. If we look at our Object Explorer, we can see where all of these are created. Let me zoom over here. First thing you'll notice is Wide World Importers. I can go to my tables, and we can see an option here for external tables. We now see where those exist, and so we can now see that. Then we can go to our external resources. We can see our external data sources, my blob storage, and we can also see our external file formats here, that Parquet file format that we can create, that we've created. I've also connected through Management Studio to my Azure storage account. You can do this in SSMS 20. I'm in a 21 preview, so you can do that here as well. So if I go to my containers, Deb storage testing, and we can see the Parquet files that we had just created. So now we have another way to view this, see what's there, and kind of work from what we need at this point. I had mentioned earlier that there are a couple of different use cases for creating these external tables. One of them was we want to create the files that we can give to another team for ingestion. So for this example, I'm going to create nightly files for each day of the month, and I'm going to make those available for our analytics team to then ingest. Each one is going to have a name, customer transactions underscore the date, and that's how we're going to use to figure out, do I need to create a file for this or not? Let's say I'm going to create a nightly job that's going to take the day. We're going to start with, let's say, February 1st, 2013. That's going to be the first date I'm going to create the file for. So my syntax is fairly simple. It's pretty straightforward. I've just taken the information we looked at earlier and I've just made it a little bit more dynamic. So I'm creating my variables, I'm selecting the date I'm going to be basing things off of, and then I'm going to look to see if the table's there. If it's not, then I'm going to create my external table, and I'm going to use select from the customer transactions table using the date that I have, February 1st, figuring out what the next date is. I'm going to print the SQL because I like knowing what my syntax was when I do dynamic SQL. And then I'm going to execute and create my tables. So I'm running that. I see my syntax. I can see 152 records were added to that Parquet file. So it's all set. I can now go query this if I wanted to. Well, what if we don't need to run this daily? It seems like a lot. Maybe we need to make this a monthly process. Not a problem. I can take the same thing that I did here and I can add a little bit of SQL to it and I can run it for the entire month. Obviously, I need to figure out what the end of the month is, and I can create a loop. So I can figure out advance the day, advance the month from where I am. Again, I'm doing that same check. Hey, does this table exist? Do I have an external table for this? And if not, then I'll do that same logic to create my external table. I'll run it, and then I can go to the next day until I've hit the end of the month. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off. While that's running, let's go look at our Object Explorer and see what we've added. I'm going to zoom in over here, my external tables. I'm going to refresh, and if I expand, we can start seeing we're now on the 23rd, so we're almost done. I've refreshed that. The entire month of February has now been created in an external table, which means I have Parquet files for these. Let's go check my container, refresh, expand, zoom in, and now we can see all the different Parquet files that were done. There you have it. I created Parquet files directly into my Azure Blob Storage from my On-Prem SQL Server 2022 instance. I'm going to leave you with a lot of the Microsoft documentation links that I used to put it together. I followed them, and honestly, it made the process very easy and very straightforward. In fact, I think I got it right the first time. I know, I'm still scared by that as well. Hopefully knowing it made it very easy for me to do makes it less intimidating for you and something you'll be able to play with and figure out a use case of your own for this. There are a lot of nuances that are involved, obviously, but definitely spend some time with documentation and I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.